At my fiancé's family dinner, I deliberately played the role they expected: quiet, poorly dressed, and seemingly naive. While they mocked my background, questioned my worth, and compared me to better women, I stayed calm and observant. What none of them realized was that I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to watch, because hidden behind my silence was a financial truth powerful enough to change every relationship at that table forever. If you want to know what happened when I finally revealed who I really was and how one dinner changed everything, hit that like button and subscribe now. Comment below about a time you were underestimated. This story will shock you. Let's begin. My name is Alexandra Chen, though everyone calls me Alex, and I need to tell you about the night I deliberately let my fiancé's family believe I was a poor, uneducated gold digger, while secretly knowing that I controlled more wealth than their entire family combined. This is a story about assumptions, about the performance of class and worthiness, about watching people reveal their true characters when they think you're beneath them, and about the moment when carefully maintained facades come crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. I met Christopher Ashford when I was 28, and he was 31. We were both at a professional conference in Boston, both presenting papers on sustainable urban development, and we connected immediately over shared passions for environmental architecture and social responsibility in city planning. Christopher was charming and intelligent, genuinely passionate about his work as an architect, focused on affordable housing projects. He didn't come from money despite his patrician last name, having built his career through scholarship and determination rather than family connections. Our relationship developed naturally over 6 months of long-distance communication before I relocated to New York for work, and we could finally be in the same city. Christopher was different from anyone I'd dated before, refreshingly unconcerned with the trappings of wealth and status that characterized so much of New York's social scene. He lived modestly despite earning a decent salary, donated significant portions of his income to charity, and seemed genuinely committed to making the world better through his work. We'd been together for 18 months when Christopher proposed during a weekend hiking trip in the Adirondacks. It was simple and heartfelt, exactly what I would have wanted. We decided on a long engagement to properly plan our wedding and merge our lives, and that's when Christopher said it was time for me to meet his family. "I should warn you," Christopher said carefully as we planned the dinner. "My family is complicated. My parents are very traditional and somewhat status-conscious. They're going to judge you, probably unfairly, and you should be prepared for that." "What do they know about me?" I asked. "Just the basics. That you work in urban planning, that we met at a conference, that I love you." I haven't told them much detail, because honestly, I've been putting off this meeting for a reason. What Christopher didn't know, what I'd never explicitly told him because it genuinely didn't matter to our relationship, was exactly who I was beyond my job title and my passion for sustainable cities. Christopher knew I worked as director of community development for a mid-sized nonprofit focused on affordable housing initiatives. What he didn't know was that I was also Alexandra Chen, sole heir to the Chen technology fortune, daughter of Michael Chen, who'd founded one of the most successful software companies of the 1990s before selling it for $800 million when I was 15. I'd grown up with extraordinary wealth, but had deliberately built an adult life separate from it. I used my mother's maiden name Winters professionally, lived in a modest apartment appropriate to my nonprofit salary, drove a practical used car, and generally avoided the conspicuous consumption that characterized so many people with inherited wealth. The money was there, carefully managed by financial advisors and generating enough returns that I'd never need to work. But I worked anyway because I believed in the mission and wanted to build something meaningful with my own efforts. I'd planned to tell Christopher about my financial background eventually, probably before we got married, but I'd wanted to build our relationship on who we actually were rather than on wealth or status. I wanted him to love Alex, the urban planner and housing advocate, not Alexandra Chen, the tech heiress. So far, I'd succeeded, and our relationship was based entirely on genuine connection rather than any consideration of money or social position. When Christopher told me his family would likely judge me unfairly, something sparked in my mind. I'd spent years in wealthy circles watching people reveal their true characters based on assumptions about others' worth and status. I'd seen how people treated those they perceived as beneath them versus those they saw as equals or superiors. And I realized I had a unique opportunity here to see exactly who Christopher's family really was before permanently joining that family through marriage. I made a decision that was perhaps manipulative, but felt necessary. I would go to this family dinner deliberately playing into whatever assumptions they wanted to make about me. I would dress down, stay quiet, let them believe I was exactly the kind of inappropriate match they feared Christopher had chosen. I would watch how they treated someone they perceived as poor and unworthy. And then, eventually, I'd reveal the truth and see how quickly their attitudes shifted when they learned about my actual background. The dinner was scheduled for a Saturday evening at the Ashford family estate in Connecticut. Christopher had described it as his childhood home, a property his grandparents had purchased in the 1940s, and that had been in the family ever since. As we drove through the gates and up the long driveway, I could see it was indeed impressive. A sprawling colonial mansion on several acres of perfectly manicured grounds. I'd dressed carefully for this performance. Instead of the designer clothes hanging in my closet that I rarely wore, I'd chosen an inexpensive dress from a discount retailer, slightly ill-fitting and in an unflattering color. I wore minimal makeup and had pulled my hair back in a simple ponytail. I'd left my jewelry at home except for small costume earrings. I looked exactly like what they'd probably expect. A woman who didn't have money for better clothes and didn't know how to present herself properly in wealthy social settings. Christopher noticed my outfit and seemed slightly concerned. "You look nice," he said uncertainly. "But you know you could have dressed up more if you wanted. My family won't judge you based on clothes." I smiled and said I was comfortable, which was true. I was very comfortable in this disguise. We were greeted at the door by Christopher's mother, Margaret Ashford, a perfectly coiffed woman in her early 60s, wearing what I recognized as a Chanel suit. Her smile was practiced and didn't reach her eyes as she looked me over, and I saw her gaze linger disapprovingly on my discount dress. "You must be Alexandra," she said, her tone pleasant but cool. "Christopher has told us so little about you. Please come in." The family was gathered in a formal living room that screamed old money, antique furniture, oil paintings of ancestors, Persian rugs, crystal decanters of expensive liquor. Christopher's father, Richard, was a distinguished-looking man in his mid-60s holding a scotch. Christopher's older sister, Catherine, was there with her husband, Bradford, both dressed expensively and radiating the kind of casual entitlement that comes from never having questioned one's place in the social hierarchy. Introductions were made, and I could feel them all assessing me, their eyes traveling over my cheap dress, my simple hairstyle, my lack of obvious sophistication. I saw Catherine whisper something to Bradford, who smirked in response. I saw Margaret's barely concealed disappointment. I saw Richard's dismissive glance before he turned his attention back to his drink. "So, Alexandra," Margaret said as we settled into chairs, "Christopher tells us you work in, what was it? Community development? Urban planning, specifically focused on affordable housing initiatives," I said, deliberately keeping my voice soft and slightly uncertain. "I work for a nonprofit that helps develop housing projects for low-income communities." "How noble," Catherine said, and the word dripped with condescension. "And does this nonprofit work pay well?" "Not particularly," I admitted truthfully. "But it's meaningful work." "I'm sure it is," Margaret said in a tone that suggested she thought nothing of the sort. "And where did you study?" "Christopher went to Yale, of course." "State University," I said, which was technically true. I'd gone to UC Berkeley for undergrad, which was indeed a state university, though I conveniently didn't mention it was one of the top public universities in the world, or that I'd also gotten my master's from MIT. I was on scholarship. I saw them all exchange glances and knew exactly what they were thinking. State school scholarship student working at a nonprofit with Christopher, who'd gone to Yale and came from an established family. This was exactly the kind of inappropriate match they'd feared. Dinner was announced, and we moved to a formal dining room with a table that could easily seat 14. The meal was served by staff, which didn't surprise me, and the china and crystal were obviously expensive heirlooms. Throughout dinner, the family's treatment of me became increasingly condescending, as they grew more confident in their assessment of my unworthiness. "Tell me, Alexandra," Richard said over the first course, "what do your parents do?" Are they also in social work? My father passed away when I was young, I said, which was true. He'd died from a heart attack when I was 23. My mother works in education. Also true. My mother consulted for educational nonprofits using her expertise and our family's resources to improve schools in underserved communities, though I didn't mention she did this as unpaid philanthropic work rather than because she needed the income. I'm sorry about your father, Margaret said with perfunctory sympathy. It must have been difficult growing up without that financial security. I just nodded, letting them assume what they wanted. Catherine took a different approach. Christopher, I ran into Melissa Hartford last week. Do you remember her? She asked about you. She's just finished her MBA at Harvard and is working at Goldman Sachs now. Such an impressive woman. The message was clear. Melissa Hartford, with her Harvard MBA and Goldman Sachs pedigree, was the kind of woman Christopher should have chosen. I was not. I'm sure Melissa is doing well, Christopher said stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with his sister's obvious comparison. But I'm not interested in Melissa Hartford. I'm engaged to Alex. Of course, Catherine said sweetly. I just think it's interesting how life works out. You could have had so many options, and you chose this. Bradford chimed in with his own contribution. I hope you have a good prenuptial agreement drawn up, Christopher. Given your family's assets and Alexandra's background, it would only be prudent. We haven't discussed that, Christopher said, his voice tight with anger. And it's really none of your business, Bradford. Oh, I think it's very much family business, Margaret interjected. We're just looking out for your interests, darling. You can't be too careful these days. They continued this way throughout dinner, each comment more insulting than the last. They questioned my education, my career, my background, my intentions with Christopher. They made it abundantly clear that they considered me a gold digger, or at best a naive idealist, completely unsuited to their family's social position. They compared me unfavorably to women Christopher had dated before, all from appropriate backgrounds with impressive credentials. Through it all, I stayed quiet and observant, playing the role of the overwhelmed poor girl out of her depth. I watched Christopher grow increasingly angry and defensive on my behalf. I watched his family reveal exactly who they were when they thought they were dealing with someone they could safely dismiss and disparage. Catherine told a story about a charity gala where people like you wouldn't understand the social complexities involved. Margaret suggested I might be more comfortable if I didn't attend certain family events where I'd be out of my element. Richard spoke at length about the importance of marrying within one's own class to avoid complications. Bradford made several comments about my appearance and dress that were borderline cruel. Over dessert, Margaret delivered what she clearly thought was the decisive blow. Alexandra, dear, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but I have to ask, what do you really expect from this marriage? Christopher comes from a certain background, has certain expectations for his life. Can you truly provide the kind of partnership he needs? Before I could respond, Christopher exploded. Mother, that's enough. I can't believe how you've treated Alex all evening. You've been rude and condescending and completely inappropriate. Alex is the woman I love, and your approval or disapproval means nothing compared to that. Christopher, please, Margaret said calmly. We're simply being realistic. This girl is lovely, I'm sure, but she's not appropriate for our family. Surely you can see that. What I see, Christopher said hotly, is that my family is full of snobs who judge people based on their bank accounts and social connections rather than their character or worth as human beings. That's not fair, Catherine protested. We're just concerned about money, Christopher interrupted. You're concerned about money and status and what your friends at the country club will think. Well, I don't care about any of that. I care about Alex. I put my hand on Christopher's arm. It's okay, I said quietly. I understand their concerns. They don't really know me. Exactly, Margaret pounced on this. We don't know you. We know nothing about your background or your family or your intentions. How can we be expected to welcome you when you're such a complete unknown? I looked around the table at these people who'd spent the entire evening making assumptions and judgments based on my appearance and my job title. I thought about all the times I'd watched wealthy people reveal their true characters when dealing with those they perceived as beneath them. I thought about my father, who'd come from nothing and built an empire. who'd taught me that character mattered more than bank accounts, but that people with neither character nor sense often couldn't see the difference. And I decided it was time. "You're right," I said, my voice changing from soft and uncertain to clear and confident. "You don't know me. Would you like to?" Something in my tone made everyone go still. Christopher looked at me with confusion, but I saw a hint of recognition in his eyes, as if he was suddenly seeing something in me he'd missed before. "My full name is Alexandra Ming Chen," I said clearly. "I'm the daughter of Michael Chen, who founded Chen Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of it?" I watched the color drain from Margaret's face. I saw Richard's Scotch glass pause halfway to his mouth. Catherine and Bradford exchanged shocked looks. "My father sold Chen Technologies in 2008 for $800 million, I continued calmly. "When he passed away, I inherited his estate as the sole heir. The current value of that inheritance, including all investments and appreciation, is approximately $1.2 billion. The silence at the table was absolute. I use my mother's maiden name professionally because I prefer to build my career on my own merit, rather than my family's wealth. I work at the nonprofit because I believe in the mission, not because I need the income. I live modestly because conspicuous consumption has never interested me. But make no mistake, I could buy this house and everything in it without making a noticeable dent in my portfolio." Margaret had gone from pale to red. "You're saying you're a billionaire. I'm saying I'm the heir to a considerable fortune, yes, though I think of myself primarily as an urban planner who happens to have substantial financial resources. The work I do matters to me more than the money I have." Richard was the first to try to recover. "Well, this is certainly unexpected news. Had you known, you would have treated me completely differently," I interrupted, "which is exactly why I didn't tell you. I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I was poor and powerless. And you showed me." "Now, wait just a moment," Bradford started, but I cut him off. "You've spent this entire evening insulting me, questioning my worth, comparing me to women you deemed more appropriate for Christopher. You made assumptions based on my clothes and my job and my background. You treated me with contempt because you thought you could safely do so." "We were just being protective of Christopher," Catherine said weakly. "No, you were being snobs. There's a difference. You weren't concerned about Christopher's happiness or my character. You were concerned about status and appearances and money. And now that you know I have money, I'm guessing your opinions are going to change very quickly." Margaret tried to regroup. "Alexandra, I think perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. If you'd known about my background, you would have fawned over me instead of insulting me. But I would have been exactly the same person. The only thing that would have changed was your perception of my bank account." I turned to Christopher, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and something that looked like awe. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I should have been honest about my financial situation before we got engaged. I just wanted to build our relationship on who we really are, not on money or status." "You're a billionaire," Christopher said slowly, as if testing the words. "And you've been working at a nonprofit making $50,000 a year. The money doesn't define me," I said. "The work I do defines me. But yes, I have significant financial resources that I've kept separate from my professional life and from our relationship." "This is extraordinary," Richard said, and I could see him already recalculating everything. "The Chen Technologies fortune. I had no idea Michael Chen had a daughter. He preferred to keep me out of the public eye," I said, "and I've preferred to maintain that privacy, which is why I'd appreciate if this information didn't leave this room. I don't advertise my financial status, and I'd like to keep it that way." Of course," Margaret said quickly, her entire demeanor transformed. "We completely understand. And Alexandra, please forgive our earlier behavior. We simply didn't realize I was rich enough to deserve your respect," I finished for her. "Yes, I got that. The question is whether you're willing to examine why that mattered so much to you." The rest of the evening was awkward in entirely new ways. The family tried desperately to backtrack, to apologize, to reframe their earlier behavior as some kind of misunderstanding. Margaret suggested we all start over. Richard offered expensive wine he'd been saving for special occasions. Catherine tried to engage me in conversation about luxury brands and exclusive events I might have attended. I remained polite but distant. making it clear that their sudden change in attitude only confirmed everything I'd observed earlier. Christopher was quiet, processing not just the revelation about my wealth, but also the stark exposure of his family's true characters. We left earlier than originally planned, Christopher citing fatigue, and my citing a need to process the evening. In the car, we drove in silence for nearly 20 minutes before Christopher finally spoke. "You're a billionaire," he said again, still seemingly unable to fully grasp it. "You've been a billionaire this entire time we've been together." "Yes, and you never told me. I was going to tell you before we got married. I just wanted us to build our relationship first, without money complicating things. And tonight, you deliberately let them think you were poor. You set them up." "I gave them an opportunity to show who they really are," I corrected. "They made their own choices about how to treat someone they perceived as beneath them." Christopher was quiet for another long moment. "They were horrible to you." "Yes. They would have been completely different if they'd known about your money." "Undoubtedly. Which means their respect isn't based on who you are as a person. It's based on your bank account. That seems to be the case." Christopher pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to look at me directly. "I need to know something. Are you upset that I didn't defend you more strongly? Before you revealed who you were?" "You did defend me," I said. "You told them I was the woman you loved and their approval didn't matter. That's what mattered to me. But I didn't shut it down earlier. I let them go on insulting you for most of dinner. Because I let them. I was making a choice to observe them, to see exactly how far they'd go. You didn't know that, but it's the truth. I wasn't a helpless victim tonight, Christopher. I was conducting an experiment in human nature, an experiment that my family failed spectacularly." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I know they're your family, and this has to be painful." "They showed me who they really are," Christopher said. "I always knew they were status conscious and concerned with appearances, but I didn't fully realize how deeply that went until I watched them treat you with such contempt, and then saw how instantly they changed when they learned about your money." We sat in silence for a while, both processing the implications of the evening. "I don't care about your money," Christopher said finally. "I need you to know that. I fell in love with Alex the urban planner, the woman passionate about creating better communities. The fact that you have $1 billion doesn't change who you are or why I love you." "I know," I said. "That's why I didn't tell you sooner. I wanted to be sure we were building something real." "We are," Christopher said firmly. "And honestly, the fact that you've had this incredible wealth and chosen to live simply and work in affordable housing makes me love you even more. You could have been doing anything, living anywhere, buying anything you wanted. Instead, you're fighting for better housing for low-income families." "The money gives me freedom," I said. "Freedom to do work that matters without worrying about salary. That's worth more than anything I could buy." "What happens now?" Christopher asked. "With my family? That's up to you," I said. "They're your family. You get to decide what kind of relationship you want to have with them going forward. They owe you an apology, a real one, not based on your bank account. They owe themselves some self-examination," I said. "But whether they're capable of that remains to be seen." Over the following weeks, the dynamics with Christopher's family became even more complicated. Once they'd had time to fully process that their son was engaged to a billionaire, they swung wildly in the other direction. Suddenly, I was the perfect match for Christopher, exactly the kind of sophisticated woman they'd always hoped he'd marry. Margaret called constantly with suggestions for the wedding, assuming we'd want something extravagant and expensive. Catherine invited me to exclusive events and tried to introduce me to her wealthy social circle. Richard suggested business opportunities and investment strategies. I maintained polite distance from all of it, making clear that my financial status didn't change who I was or how I intended to live my life. I didn't want their newfound acceptance any more than I'd appreciated their earlier contempt, because both were based on the same shallow values. Christopher struggled with the revelation of his family's true characters. He'd always known they were flawed, but seeing them so clearly revealed by their treatment of me had been disillusioning. He initiated several difficult conversations with his parents and sister about values, respect, and the difference between person's worth and their financial worth. The wedding planning process revealed even more uncomfortable truths. Margaret assumed I'd want to fund an elaborate society wedding and was shocked when I insisted on the modest ceremony Christopher and I had originally planned. Catherine couldn't understand why I wouldn't want to wear a couture designer gown, or why I wasn't interested in having the wedding covered by society magazines. They seemed genuinely confused that having money didn't mean I wanted to spend it conspicuously. "What's the point of having $1 billion if you're going to act like you don't?" Catherine asked me once in genuine bewilderment. "The point is that money is a tool, not an identity," I explained. "I use it to support causes I care about, and to give myself freedom to do work that matters. I don't use it to prove anything to anyone or to buy status and respect." "But you could have anything," she protested. "You could be living in a mansion, driving a Ferrari, wearing designer everything. Instead, you live in a normal apartment and drive a Honda and dress like you did that first night at dinner." "Yes," I agreed, "because those things don't interest me. I'd rather donate to affordable housing projects than live in a mansion. I'd rather fund educational programs than buy designer clothes. My priorities are different from yours, and that's okay." Margaret tried a different approach. "Surely you'll want to provide Christopher with the lifestyle he's accustomed to. The Ashford family has a certain standard of living. Christopher is perfectly capable of maintaining his own lifestyle," I said calmly. "He has a successful career and earns a good salary. We've discussed our finances, and we're both comfortable with how we want to live. My money is mine to do with as I choose, and I choose to use it for purposes beyond consumption." What bothered them most, I think, was that they couldn't control or predict me. They couldn't fit me into their existing categories of how wealthy people should behave. I had money, but didn't care about social status. I had resources but chose to work at a nonprofit. I had options but chose simplicity. It confused and frustrated them. Bradford took Christopher aside one day and apparently told him he was foolish for not insisting on access to my wealth, that any smart man would leverage his wife's billions for his own advancement. Christopher told him that any decent human being would love their partner for who they are, not for what financial advantages they might provide. The breaking point came about 3 months before our wedding. Margaret planned a large engagement party without consulting us, assuming I'd appreciate the opportunity to be celebrated by society. When I found out, I told her clearly that we didn't want such an event and she needed to cancel it. "Don't be ridiculous," Margaret said. "This is the perfect opportunity to introduce you to everyone who matters. You can't just hide your background forever." "I'm not hiding it," I said. "I'm choosing privacy, and I'm telling you that I don't want this party. Cancel it. I've already sent invitations to over 200 people. The venue is booked. This is happening whether you like it or not. Then it will happen without me," I said calmly, "because I won't attend an event I explicitly said I didn't want." Margaret was outraged, but I held firm. Christopher backed me completely. When Margaret refused to cancel, I simply didn't show up on the night of the party. Christopher didn't either. We spent the evening at home together while Margaret had to explain to 200 guests that the engaged couple had chosen not to attend their own engagement party. It caused a significant rift. Margaret accused me of humiliating her deliberately. Catherine said I was being unreasonable and childish. Richard tried to mediate but clearly sided with Margaret. The family drama escalated to the point where Christopher had to make a choice between his family's expectations and his partnership with me. He chose me. He told his family clearly that if they couldn't respect my boundaries and choices, they wouldn't be part of our lives going forward. He made it clear that my decision to live privately despite my wealth was not something they got to override or criticize. And he told them that until they could genuinely apologize for their treatment of me, both before and after learning about my money, they wouldn't be invited to our wedding. It was a hard line, and it cost Christopher his relationship with his family for several months. His mother stopped speaking to him. His sister unfriended him on social media. His father sent disappointed emails about family loyalty and tradition. But during this time, I saw Christopher's character most clearly. He didn't resent me for the situation with his family. He didn't pressure me to accommodate them or make peace for the sake of harmony. He recognized that their behavior had been unacceptable and held them accountable, even when it was painful and isolating. About 2 months before our wedding, Margaret finally reached out with what seemed like a genuine apology. She admitted that she'd treated me poorly both before and after learning about my wealth, that she'd valued status and appearance over character, and that she'd been wrong to try to control how I lived my life or spent my money. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she told me during a lunch meeting she'd requested, "about why I reacted the way I did that first night, and why I've behaved so badly since learning about your background. And I think it's because your choices challenge everything I've believed about wealth and status and what matters." "How so?" I asked. "You have everything I spent my life trying to achieve through marriage and social climbing. You have money and connections and options, but you don't use them the way I always thought anyone would. You don't seem to care about impressing people or buying status or living the kind of life I always imagined wealth would provide." "Because those things don't actually make you happy," I said. "My father had enormous wealth, and he was miserable when he focused on acquisition and status. He was only happy when he started using his resources to make a difference in the world." "I'm not sure I know how to value people outside of those metrics," Margaret admitted. "Money and status and connections have been my framework for understanding worth my entire life. When I met you that first night, I saw someone who didn't have those things, and I genuinely believed that meant you weren't good enough for my son. And now?" I asked. "Now I'm trying to understand that worth comes from character and values, not bank accounts. But I have to be honest, it's hard to change thinking that's been ingrained for 60 years. It was the most honest conversation I'd had with Margaret, and while I didn't fully trust this change of heart, I appreciated the attempt at self-examination. Christopher and I agreed to allow his family back into our lives cautiously, with clear boundaries and consequences, if they reverted to their previous behavior. They were invited to our wedding, which we held as originally planned, a modest ceremony with close friends and family, no society photographers or extravagant displays. Margaret struggled visibly with the simplicity but managed to restrain her commentary. Catherine seemed baffled by the whole thing, but was at least polite. Richard and Bradford were on their best behavior, though I could see them cataloging everything that could have been grander or more impressive. After the wedding, as Christopher and I built our married life, we maintained relationships with his family, but on our terms. We saw them for holidays and occasional dinners, but we didn't allow them to dictate how we lived or spent our money. I continued my work in affordable housing, using my personal wealth to fund projects through my own foundation, while maintaining my day job at the nonprofit. Christopher continued his architectural work focused on sustainable design for low-income communities. About a year into our marriage, Christopher's firm faced potential bankruptcy after a major client defaulted on a significant contract. The firm employed dozens of people who would lose their jobs if it went under, and Christopher was devastated by the possibility of letting them all down. His family suggested he ask me for money to bail out the firm, but Christopher refused, saying it wasn't fair to use my resources to fix his business problems. I offered anyway, not because his family pressured him, but because I believed in what his firm was trying to accomplish, and because I had the means to help. I invested enough to keep the firm solvent and became a silent partner, allowing Christopher to maintain control and leadership, while ensuring the company could continue its important work. Margaret learned about this and called to thank me, which was unexpected. "I'm glad Christopher has you," she said. "Not because of your money, though obviously that helped in this situation, but because you use your resources to do good things. You could have let the firm fail, and it wouldn't have affected your life at all. But you helped because it mattered to people you care about. That's what money should be for," I said, "helping people and supporting work that matters." "I'm still learning that," Margaret admitted, "but I'm trying." That conversation marked a real turning point in our relationship. Margaret would never be perfect, would probably always care too much about appearances and status, but she was genuinely trying to understand different values and to treat people based on character rather than bank accounts. Looking back now, 3 years after that first disastrous family dinner, I have complicated feelings about the experiment I conducted. On one hand, it was manipulative to deliberately deceive them about my background and to set them up to reveal their worst characteristics. On the other hand, it showed me exactly who they were when they thought they had power over me, and that information has been valuable in navigating our relationship. I learned that night that the Ashfords valued money and status above character and kindness. I learned that they were willing to insult and demean someone they perceived as beneath them. I learned that their respect was conditional on wealth, rather than based on human worth. Those were important things to know before permanently joining their family. But I also learned that people can change, at least somewhat. Margaret has genuinely tried to examine her values and adjust her behavior. Christopher proved that he valued character over family loyalty when those things conflicted. And his family, when forced to confront their own prejudices and snobbery, has made efforts to do better, even if those efforts are imperfect. The situation also taught me about the performance of class and wealth. I'd always known intellectually that people treat the rich differently than the poor, but experiencing it so directly was powerful. The exact same person in different clothes with a different job title received completely opposite treatment from the same people. That revealed something troubling about human nature and social hierarchies that I continue to think about. I've become more deliberate about discussing these issues with Christopher, about raising awareness of how privilege and wealth create different experiences in the world. He's become more conscious of his own advantages and assumptions, and we work together to use our combined resources and positions to make positive changes in affordable housing and urban development. I still work at the nonprofit, though I've also dramatically increased my personal philanthropic work through my foundation. I still live relatively modestly despite having essentially unlimited resources. I still value substance over appearance and character over status. Having money hasn't changed who I am, but it's given me more capacity to do the work I care about. The night I deliberately acted like a poor and naive girl at my fiancé's family dinner was manipulative and perhaps not my finest moment. But it revealed truths about his family that I needed to know. It showed me that their values were shallow and their respect was conditional. It demonstrated that they judged people based on bank accounts rather than character. And when I finally revealed the financial truth they'd been so wrong about, it exposed how quickly their opinions shifted based on nothing but my net worth. The same person they'd mocked and dismissed hours earlier suddenly became worthy of respect and acceptance simply because they learned I controlled millions, actually billions. That night changed everything. It ended any pretense of unconditional acceptance from Christopher's family. It revealed the conditional nature of their respect. It showed Christopher exactly who his family was in ways he hadn't fully seen before. And it gave me the information I needed to navigate that relationship with clear eyes and appropriate boundaries. Would I do it again? I'm not sure. The manipulation bothers me in retrospect, even though it served a purpose. But I can't regret learning those truths, even though they were painful. Sometimes you need to see people at their worst to understand who they really are. And sometimes the only way to see that is to let them believe they have power over you and watch what they do with it. The millions I controlled weren't the point, really. The point was that I had value as a person regardless of my bank account. But Christopher's family couldn't see that until the money made them look. And that said far more about them than it ever said about me. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated based on appearance or background, smash that like button and subscribe. Share with someone who knows their worth regardless of others' judgments. Comment about a time people's assumptions about you were completely wrong. Remember that your value as a human being has nothing to do with your bank account, that character matters more than status, and that people who only respect wealth aren't worth having respect from.